Humans had been living under the illusion that Earth was their own private domain, a sprawling planet of chaotic traffic jams, late-night pizza runs, and the occasional meteor shower when the broadcast hit. A blinding pulse of light cut across every screen on the planet: televisions, phones, even smart fridges somehow, and a single, calm voice filled every room. "Firearms are now prohibited," it said, in a tone that suggested this was both obvious and inevitable, like banning salt from soup. Confusion reigned immediately. Suburban dads stared at their rifles in horror, trying to figure out if the announcement had also voided their weekend barbecues, while teenagers yelped, "Does this mean we can't pretend to shoot aliens in VR anymore?" In a Pentagon conference room somewhere in Virginia, General Hawthorne banged his fist on the table. "Do they even know what a rifle is?" he demanded. Around him, staffers muttered phrases like interstellar oversight and alien council mandate, words that meant little to anyone except the guy who had once tried to sell used alien technology on eBay. Outside, civilians took to the streets in a curious mixture of panic and comedy. Some attempted to hide their shotguns behind garden gnomes, while others wandered around waving sticks, muttering, "Well, at least arrows are still legal." The alien envoy responsible for the decree arrived not with a fleet of warships or ominous threats, but in a craft that looked suspiciously like a floating art installation from the 1980s. Hovering over the Capitol, it shimmered in hues of green and violet, and a door hissed open. From it stepped Lysera. Her human-like features were deceptively normal, with high cheekbones and pale, smooth skin, but her ears extended gracefully from the sides of her head, tapering to points that twitched constantly, as if they were independently listening to the universe's secrets. Her eyes were a peculiar amber, reflecting sunlight in ways that made everyone instinctively tilt their heads, unsure whether they were staring at her or being stared at by some optical illusion. She inclined her head slightly, smiled a small, knowing smile, and said, "I hope your species isn't too attached to noisy toys." In the streets, humans tried to come to terms with their new limitations. One soldier muttered, "So, what now? Hand-to-hand combat, fencing lessons?" His companion, adjusting a pair of goggles that looked like a sci-fi calendar, replied, "I vote for catapults. At least then we can make dramatic entrances." Meanwhile, Lysera floated down from her craft on a platform of invisible propulsion, her ears twitching in rhythm with some internal melody that humans couldn't hear. She observed the chaos with detached amusement, occasionally leaning over to whisper comments like, "That one seems well suited to slapstick defense," as a man tripped over his own duffel bag while attempting to hide his pistol. Back in the military labs, human engineers were assembling what they called Plan B, which involved arrows, specifically armor-piercing steel arrows with custom launch mechanisms that looked like a blend of medieval crossbows and experimental railguns. The scientists bickered incessantly over shapes, weights, and materials, their voices a symphony of technical jargon punctuated by groans and sarcastic sighs. One intern suggested adding glitter to the arrows for psychological effect, prompting laughter and immediate dismissal. "Yes," the lead engineer said, "because nothing says intimidation like sparkly death." Lysera wandered among them, observing quietly before interjecting. "Have you considered the aerodynamics of panic?" she asked. The room froze. Then the youngest technician grinned. "You mean if the humans are scared, will the arrows fly straighter?" Lysera's ears twitched in a gesture that could almost be mistaken for a shrug. "Precisely. Fear can be an untapped resource." Her humor was dry, subtle, but it made the engineers laugh nervously as they resumed their work, now wondering whether she was joking or not. Outside, civilians began to experiment with makeshift weapons. Garden hoses became flexible spears, traffic cones were wielded as helmets, and a man in a rabbit costume attempted to lasso a streetlight with a jump rope. Lysera floated nearby, leaning slightly to the side, muttering, "Your species is both horrifying and endlessly entertaining." A child tugged on her sleeve. "Are you going to zap us?" she asked. Lysera crouched down, her long ears brushing the child's shoulder, and said, "Only if you start shooting glitter arrows at me first." The child ran off giggling, leaving adults staring in equal parts confusion and relief. As the sun dipped behind the skyline, the first tests of human ingenuity began. Soldiers with awkwardly engineered arrow launchers attempted to hit drones hovering in formation above the city. The drones dodged with uncanny precision, zipping past arrows that missed entirely or bounced off street signs. Lysera, observing from a low hover, chuckled to herself as a human recruit fell backward into a trash bin after launching a particularly overambitious shot. Grace under pressure is overrated, she mused. The chapter's tension threaded itself through these absurdities. Humans were unarmed in the traditional sense, yet they refused to be helpless. They improvised, adapted, and laughed at themselves along the way. Lysera's presence was a constant, a strange mixture of observation, mentorship, and gentle mockery. By the time night fell, the streets were littered with test arrows, toppled trash cans, and the occasional confused squirrel, but humanity had proven one thing. Even stripped of their most familiar weapons, they would find a way to fight and to laugh while doing it. And in the quiet hum of the hovering alien craft, Lysera tapped a finger against her chin, ears flicking thoughtfully. Perhaps this species wasn't entirely predictable. Perhaps they were just chaotic enough to survive. Or perhaps, she thought with a smirk, they were going to make her job much more entertaining than she'd anticipated. The morning sun glinted off the polished steel of the first human arrow prototypes, making them look almost regal as they rested in their racks, each one tipped with a jagged, shining point designed to pierce alien armor. The soldiers gathered around like a group of overeager kids at a science fair, craning their necks to get a better look while muttering strategies they weren't sure would work. One sergeant held an arrow upside down for a full 30 seconds before realizing his mistake and muttering, "Well, that's embarrassing." Around them, engineers adjusted clamps, tweaked launchers, and argued over whether arrows should be painted with neon stripes or left ominously metallic. Lysera hovered just above the testing ground, her long ears flicking with every movement, picking up conversations that humans didn't even know they were having. "You might want to consider center of gravity," she said casually, watching a soldier fumble a launcher. "Or, in your case, gravity in general." The soldier, flustered, tried to respond with a joke but ended up hitting his own helmet with the butt of the launcher. A ripple of laughter spread through the team, tension melting into a kind of ridiculous camaraderie. The first live tests involved automated drones designed to mimic alien patrol units. They zipped and darted above the field, moving unpredictably with sudden swerves that made the soldiers yelp and stumble. One trainee screamed, "Incoming!" only to realize he had been warning himself. The arrow he fired had ricocheted off a target stand and narrowly missed his own foot. Lysera chuckled, a sound like soft wind through silver reeds, and quipped, "Precision is overrated when improvisation looks this entertaining." She drifted closer to the field, tilting her head to examine an arrow that spun lazily in midair after being launched, leaving a trail of sparks as if it were embarrassed by its own trajectory. Meanwhile, engineers continued to refine the launchers. One of them had the brilliant idea to attach mini-jet boosters to the arrows for extra velocity. The resulting first test sent an arrow shooting past a drone, then continuing straight into a water tower, causing a geyser that drenched half the team and a startled squirrel that had been observing from a nearby fence. "Target acquired," the engineer announced proudly, dripping wet, as soldiers groaned and Lysera's ears twitched in amusement. "Effective in morale suppression," she said, which earned a round of chuckles and eye rolls. By mid-afternoon, humans had built multiple arrow models, long-range, rapid-fire, and one ridiculous prototype they called the Boomerang of Justice, which in theory would return to the shooter after striking its target. Predictably, it did not. The first test saw it ricochet off a metal beam and nearly take out a fuel tank before embedding itself in a wall with a sad little thunk. Soldiers ducked instinctively, engineers cursed, and Lysera tilted her head, ears quivering in a way that suggested she was both horrified and secretly impressed. "Creativity," she said, "is a weapon just as dangerous as any arrow." Evening came, and the field had transformed into a chaotic battlefield of discarded arrows, toppled launchers, and puddles reflecting the strange violet light of Lysera's hovering craft. The soldiers, damp and exhausted, began training in more coordinated formations. One group experimented with synchronized volleys, trying to predict the drone's paths like dancers in a bizarre ballet of destruction. "Left, no right." "Wait, I said left?" one commander yelled, sending 3 arrows spinning off in 3 different directions. One arrow slammed into a drone with perfect timing, another embedded itself in a trash barrel, and the third hit a passing ice cream truck. The child inside stared in awe, the driver screamed, and Lysera's amused chuckle carried on the wind. Humor became a tool as essential as skill. Soldiers began telling each other ridiculous stories mid-practice to reduce fear, one claiming that the arrows would taste terrible if they ever hit an alien, scientifically untrue, but morale-boosting. Another swore that if an arrow ever returned, it would politely bow before striking again. Lysera occasionally added commentary, her ears twitching with delight. "Your species' imagination may well be its most effective defense," she said once, just as a trainee tripped over a launcher and accidentally launched a volley into the sky, which scattered like fireworks over the horizon. The culmination of the day was a simulated mission across a makeshift urban landscape built from shipping containers, abandoned cars, and holographic aliens projected from the hovering craft. Soldiers darted between cover points, arrows in hand, while Lysera moved silently among them, occasionally nudging a trainee out of the way or gently suggesting a better angle of approach. The holographic aliens reacted unpredictably, their simulated shields flickering in ways the soldiers hadn't anticipated. At one point, a soldier attempted to leap from one container to another with a fully loaded quiver on his back and ended up performing what could only be described as an accidental aerial somersault. He landed prone, arrows scattered like confetti, and muttered, "Tactical deployment?" Lysera's ears twitched and she murmured, "Improvisation indeed." By nightfall, the team was battered, soaked, and exhilarated. They had failed spectacularly in some ways. Launchers exploded, drones escaped, arrows flew off course, but they had also succeeded in others, hitting targets they didn't even know they could. The humor of each mishap created bonds that were stronger than any arrow could pierce, and the absurdity of their attempts gave them resilience they hadn't anticipated. Lysera watched them regroup, a small smile playing on her lips as her long ears flicked in appreciation. Humans were unpredictable, ridiculous, and terrifyingly adaptable, and for the first time she wondered if this species might survive far longer than the Council anticipated. As the field grew quiet, broken only by the occasional clatter of a misfired arrow or the distant hoot of a confused owl, soldiers and engineers alike laughed at their own mistakes, shared ridiculous stories, and began brainstorming even crazier ideas for the next day. Lysera floated above them, observing silently for a moment before leaning down to whisper to a young recruit, "Never underestimate the power of absurdity. It may very well be your deadliest weapon yet." The recruit blinked, uncertain whether to feel insulted or inspired, while Lysera's ears flicked in rhythm with the city lights, reflecting violet and silver hues across her skin. The human team, drenched and exhausted, felt a sense of pride they hadn't known existed, the sense that even in the shadow of alien authority they were alive, inventive, and capable of surprising themselves. The first light of the alien twin suns glinted off the metallic skyline of the neutral territory, where humans and aliens were scheduled to test the limits of diplomacy and weaponry. The armor-piercing arrows gleamed like a promise, neatly arranged in racks that lined the cobbled streets of a city that looked half futuristic, half abandoned Earth. Soldiers tightened straps on their launchers, checking bolts, recalibrating aim, and occasionally tripping over each other in ways that made Lysera's long ears flicker with restrained amusement. "Confidence is essential," she said, hovering beside a nervous recruit, "but a sense of balance wouldn't hurt either." The recruit swallowed and tried to nod, failing spectacularly as his launcher tipped sideways, sending a single arrow spinning harmlessly into a holographic alien wall. Humans had been training for weeks, but the real test would be improvisation under scrutiny. Alien inspectors hovered nearby, their forms sleek, with translucent exoskeletons and eyes that shifted colors with every subtle movement. Lysera moved among the humans like a conductor guiding an orchestra, her amber eyes assessing readiness, her ears twitching at every nuance of sound and tension. Soldiers whispered nervous jokes about how the aliens would probably be frightened by anything remotely resembling human clumsiness, which drew smirks from engineers crouched over improvised arrow launchers. The first encounter came suddenly. A patrol of aliens, armed with energy shields that glimmered like liquid metal, advanced down the street. Humans scrambled behind crates, cars, and a few suspiciously wobbling scaffolds, launching arrows with deliberate chaos. One soldier tripped, sent an arrow spinning into the sky, and shouted, "Strategic distraction." Lysera's chuckle echoed through the street, long ears twitching. The aliens paused, uncertain whether the human behavior was threat or entertainment, and one muttered in a voice that sounded like wind through crystal pipes, "Are these creatures dangerous or just absurd?" Chaos reigned, but the humans' ingenuity shone. Rapid-fire arrows from modified launchers tore through shielded drones with surprising precision, while other arrows ricocheted off surfaces to strike multiple targets in patterns that looked like accidental art. Engineers shouted corrections and encouragement at soldiers while soldiers yelled, "Duck," and "Move left," with mixed results. Lysera floated above, her ears flicking in rhythm with the action, occasionally nudging a soldier out of the way or whispering a better angle of attack, blending mentorship and amusement seamlessly. As the engagement escalated, the humor intensified. One human, trying to vault over a barricade, landed squarely in a puddle of alien slime, slipping into a perfect prone position with arrows still nocked. Lysera's soft laughter carried over the battlefield as she murmured, "Grace is subjective, after all." Another soldier accidentally shot an arrow straight upward. It twirled and struck a drone on its return trajectory, an unplanned victory that had the team cheering wildly. In the midst of the madness, humans discovered the true strength of their creativity, adaptability, laughter, and the ability to improvise under stress. Amid the playful chaos, the main human protagonist, Captain Marcus Hale, found himself at the center of both responsibility and revelation. Once rigid, cautious, and reliant on conventional tactics, he was now constantly adjusting to unexpected variables, reading his teammates' quirks as if they were instruments, and anticipating alien reactions with a mix of strategy and humor. Marcus ducked behind a tilted car, surveying the field, and realized the arrows weren't just tools of war. They were instruments of ingenuity, symbols of humanity's ability to bend rules without breaking. Lysera hovered near him, ears twitching with amusement. "You've learned to embrace unpredictability," she noted, and Marcus, for the first time, laughed freely in the midst of battle. The climax arrived when a particularly formidable alien drone, shielded with an experimental energy barrier, advanced directly toward the human's command point. Marcus shouted orders with the confidence of someone who had been terrified of improvisation only days before. Soldiers launched a coordinated volley, arrows bouncing, spinning, and ricocheting, forming a chaotic ballet that somehow breached the shield. The drone toppled in a shower of sparks, eliciting whoops of disbelief and triumph. Lysera tilted her head, ears flicking in admiration. "Remarkable," she said, and the aliens watching from above exchanged bewildered glances, unsure whether to intervene or applaud. With the battle concluded, the humans gathered in the street, breathless, soaked, and exhilarated. Soldiers and engineers laughed over mistakes and accidental victories alike, trading stories about flying arrows, slipping recruits, and unintentional hits. Marcus walked among them, noting how far they had come. Where once fear and confusion had ruled, now there was confidence tempered with humor, a deep understanding of their own resourcefulness, and respect for the unpredictable. Lysera drifted beside him, her long ears flicking back and forth, her expression both amused and approving. "Your species has potential," she said, "if only because you refuse to take anything entirely seriously, even survival." The alien council, observing from a distance, convened to discuss the results. The humans' ingenuity had not only met the challenge but exceeded expectations. They had survived, adapted, and even impressed the aliens with their chaotic brilliance. What was intended as a demonstration of compliance had become a showcase of resourcefulness, humor, and resilience. Marcus realized that the ban on firearms had forced a transformation, not just in tactics but in the humans themselves. Where they had once relied on raw firepower, they now relied on creativity, cooperation, and a willingness to embrace absurdity as a tool of survival.